The chamber did not echo. Sound in the conclave hall was absorbed by the walls, by the atmosphere processors, by 40 different atmospheric filters running simultaneously for 40 different species. Every breath in that room was engineered. Every comfort was designed for someone who was not me. I had stood in this chamber 11 times. I knew exactly how long the walk from the entrance arch to the observer's podium was. 42 steps. I had counted them every time because counting things was how I kept myself calm, and the conclave had a talent for making me need to stay very, very calm. My name is Yale Odunya. I was Earth's sole diplomatica, attaché to the conclave of 40 worlds, and on that day I was about to watch my planet get buried in paperwork. The Volkai elder at the center dais had not moved since the session began. Volkai never moved much. They were crystalline, ancient, and so certain of their own importance that urgency had simply stopped occurring to them. Sometime around the year Earth was still figuring out iron. The elder's structure caught the chamber light and scattered it in thin blue lines across the floor. It was beautiful. The way a glacier is beautiful, cold, indifferent, enormous. The resolution was displayed on every screen in the chamber. 12 words. I had read them 40 times since they appeared on my data slate that morning, and they had not improved. The Sol Protectorate is hereby designated a Class 0 sovereignty. Non-binding, non-voting, non-essential. Non-essential. I raised my hand and requested the floor. The request was granted. Standard protocol for observer class. Representatives gave me 40 seconds. I had rehearsed what I needed to say. I had cut it down, then cut it again. 40 seconds is not a speech. It is a single clean strike, or it is nothing. I walked to the podium. 87 distress calls, I said. That is the number of times Earth vessels responded to emergency signals in conclave space over the last 30 years. Not because we were asked, because the signals were broadcasting and we were close enough to answer. Screens around the chamber displayed polite translated patience. None of them displayed interest. The Keth plague reached the Dravon outer colonies in 2219. Your quarantine protocols estimated 4.2 million casualties. Earth sent medical teams. Our immune systems processed the pathogen. Our researchers isolated the vector in 11 days. The cure went out under a conclave seal that did not include our name. The Volkai elder's surface caught the light and scattered it. Same blue lines. Same floor, no reaction. The siege of Proxima B, 3 Earth. Destroyers held Corridor 7 for 9 days against a force your own admiral said was unbreakable. 9 days we lost 1 ship and 41 crew. The conclave fleet arrived on day 10 and accepted the formal surrender. My 40 seconds were ending. I could feel it the way you feel a door closing in a room with no windows. We are not asking for reward, I said. We are asking to not be erased. The timer reached 0, a soft chime. Very polite. I stepped back from the podium. The vote was unanimous. 40 worlds, 40 approvals. The resolution passed with the efficiency of a process that had never considered the possibility of resistance, because resistance requires the other party to matter. I walked out of the chamber. I did not look at the screens. I did not look at the other representatives. My steps were even. 42 steps to the entrance arch. I counted everyone. In the corridor outside, the air was different, no atmospheric processors. Just recycled ship-grade oxygen that smelled like metal and distance. I stopped walking. I put one hand flat against the wall and looked at the floor. And breathed. A sound to my left. A Volkai delegate, young, its crystal structure still soft at the edges, still cloudy the way young Volkai are before centuries of compression clear them out. Was watching me. It had been walking past and had simply stopped, looking at me the way someone looks at a thing they find mildly puzzling. Does your kind even understand what just happened? It asked. The translation bead in my ear rendered the words in flat, clean English, no malice. In the tone, genuine curiosity. That was almost worse. I looked at it. I smiled. Yes, I said, we understand perfectly. We always do. I started walking again. I did not explain the smile. I did not explain what I meant by always. I let it stand there in the corridor with my answer, and I kept moving because the thing about being erased on paper is that paper has never once stopped a single human being from doing what they decided to do next. The conclave had just made us nothing. Nothing does not have to ask for permission. Nothing does not have jurisdiction to violate. Nothing can build whatever it wants. I reached the transit bay. My shuttle was docked at Bay 9. I sat down in the pilot seat, pulled the harness across my chest, and held the cracked stylus I kept in my left breast pocket. It had been with me since my first day in that chamber 11 years ago. The clip was broken. The ink had long dried. I had no idea why I still carried it. I held it for a moment. Then I filed my departure clearance and pointed the shuttle at home. Earth looked the same from orbit. It always does, blue and white and patient, like something that has been waiting so long it has forgotten it is waiting. I had been gone 4 months. The planet had not noticed. The debrief happened in Geneva in a building that was aggressively unremarkable, which is exactly what you want for a building where people say things that cannot be said anywhere else. 3 floors underground, filtered air. No windows, a long table and 6 people who had all at some point stopped sleeping well. I told them everything, not just the vote, the atmosphere in the chamber before it, the way the 40 screens displayed the resolution like a formality, like something already decided before anyone sat down. The Volkai elder's surface catching the light, the young delegate in the corridor. Deputy Director Owen Calloway listened without writing anything down, which was either a sign of great confidence or great resignation, and with Owen it was genuinely impossible to tell. He was 53, gray at the temples, with the particular stillness of a man who had learned to wait for the part of the story that mattered. They stripped the trade protections, he said when I finished. Yes. Navigation lane access gone. Petition rights during conclave. Emergencies gone. Pathogen warning broadcasts. I looked at him. Owen, they took everything. He nodded, not surprised. He had not been surprised when I called from the transit station. He had not been surprised when I sent the preliminary report. Owen Calloway had a talent for absorbing terrible news with the same expression other people used for weather forecasts, as if bad outcomes were simply meteorological events that required appropriate clothing. How long? I asked. Before what? Before it matters, before they. Navigation restrictions hit the supply chains, before we start losing shipping corridors. He looked at the table, 6 months on. The outer routes may be 8 after that. The food chain imports get complicated, expensive and slow. I thought about the word non-essential and what it actually meant in practical terms, not a political label, a removal of infrastructure. 30 years of assuming we had access to lanes, to warnings, to emergency channels, and now every one of those assumptions had been legislated away in 12 words. Tell me what we have, I said. Owen looked at the others at the table. A small look, brief and specific. Then he reached forward and turned the central projection on. The conclave's defensive grid appeared above the table in pale blue light. I had seen it before in strategic briefings, vast, layered, built over 2 centuries by species whose technological head start over humanity was long enough to make the gaps seem permanent. Find the gaps, Owen said. I looked for a long time. There were gaps, not many, but they were there in the deep infrastructure, in the relay stations, and the power routing, and the maintenance corridors built into the grid's outer shell. Who built those sections? I asked, although I already knew the answer was going to change something in my chest. Contract labor, Owen said, mostly independent, a lot of it human. I stared at the projection. 30 years of infrastructure contracts. Work the conclave outsourced because it was below them, because they needed labor-grade species for the physical construction of things too tedious for crystalline minds to supervise, and humanity had taken every contract, every job, because that was what we did. We showed up, we worked. We built things that were not ours and handed them over and collected the payment and went home. And we remembered every measurement, every access tunnel, every maintenance shaft. They built us into their own grid, I said. Owen did not smile. He was not that kind of man. They used us, he said, and they stopped paying attention to us at the same time. Those snorts, 2 things don't always go together with humanity. They did. I sat back. I was not feeling pride. Pride was too light for this. What I was feeling was the particular heaviness of being right about something for a very long time, and finally watching the moment when being right was going to matter. I spent 3 weeks back on Earth. The political noise was loud and constant, and I let it wash past me the way you let a river wash past when you are standing on a rock in the middle of it. Politicians wanted statements, media wanted reactions. I gave them careful, measured words that said very little and gave nothing away, because the people who needed to know what I thought were already in rooms with me. The key meeting was at the Terran Strategic Reserve Facility outside Cape Town. Admiral Nora Winters met me at the gate. Herself, she was 61, broad-shouldered, with gray-streaked hair cut close to her skull and eyes that had spent decades watching things happen in space and learning to not blink about it. She had served with me briefly years ago in a logistics command that neither of us talked about. We trusted each other the way people trust each other when they have been in a situation where trust was the only resource that did not run out. She walked me through the hangar first. 2 new frigates, lean and compact, built for fast response, designed around The principle that the fastest path between a problem and a solution is a direct line with no political bends. We've been quiet about these, she said. I can see that. The conclave doesn't monitor our shipyards the way they used to. When you're non-essential, apparently, you're also not worth watching. She said non-essential the same way I did, flat, precise, like a clinical term that contained a world of unsaid things. We went to her office. She put a projection up. Patrol routes, supply corridors, the 14 systems along our viable shipping lanes that were now either unprotected or protected by the conclave on a response timeline that, for our purposes, was functionally useless. We can cover 8 of them, she said. Not officially, not under conclave authority, just present. What does present look like? It looks like a Terran vessel on a standard patrol route that happens to pass through the relevant corridor every 6 hours. I thought about 12 words on a screen. I thought about 40 seconds at a podium. Do it, I said. She nodded. I took the transport back to Geneva that evening. My daughter called while I was in the air. Kala, 12 years old, in her school uniform, background noise of her dormitory behind her. She had seen the news. She had the kind of face that asked hard questions without softening them first. Mom, she said, is it true? Are we nothing now? I looked at her through the screen, at her 12-year-old seriousness, at the way she was holding her chin up because she had decided not to be scared even though she was. No, baby, I said, we're just unregistered. She thought about that. What's the difference? I held the cracked stylus in my left hand. Registered means someone else gave you permission to exist, I said. Unregistered means you never needed it. She did not look completely convinced. She was 12. She had her whole life to figure out how to hold onto that idea. When it was difficult, I held onto it for both of us until the call ended. Outside the transport window, Earth curved away into darkness, and the stars came up one by one, unhurried and enormous with the patience of things that have been burning for a very long time and have no intention of stopping. The signal came through on a private channel, which was the first indication that someone was embarrassed. Distress calls do not use private channels, they use emergency frequencies, wideband, loud, designed to reach everything within range. A private channel signal from a Kelshari colony administrator reaching non-member, non-essential, non-voting Earth at 400 in the morning, Geneva time, meant that someone needed help badly enough to ask for it quietly, because asking loudly would mean admitting they had asked us at all. I was awake. I had been awake for an hour already, reviewing supply chain projections that did not improve with time or attention, when my secure line lit up with the Kelshari encryption tag. I stared at it for 3 full seconds before I answered. The administrator's name was Valshan. The Kelshari were insectoid, multi-limbed, with a hive-adjacent social structure that made their diplomats extremely precise and their distress signals deeply uncomfortable, because they did not ask for help easily, and when they did, it meant something was very wrong. Commander Oduya, Valshan said. Translation came through soft and careful. I am contacting you outside official conclave channels because the official channels have a 40-hour response estimate. I sat up straighter. Tell me what's happening. The Dravon had pushed into the Kelshari. Border corridor, not a new conflict. Two species had been in a low-level territorial dispute for 11 years, managed by conclave arbitration at a pace that satisfied no one but offended no one badly enough to escalate. What had changed was that a faction within the Dravon had stopped waiting for arbitration and had sent 3 warships through the Kelshari outer colony's defensive perimeter. The colony had 12,000 inhabitants, civilian, agricultural, the kind of settlement that exists because someone decided to grow things on a rock far from home and stayed long enough to call it home. 6 hours, Valshan said. That is the estimate before they reach the colonies in a ring, and the conclave response time is 40 hours, I said. 30 at now, yes. I did the math. It was not complicated math. The answer was the same from every direction. You know Earth has vessels in your corridor, I said. It was not a question. Valshan would not be calling me at 400 in the morning if they did not already know exactly what assets were near enough to matter. 2 frigates, they said, running standard patrol. They could reach our outer defense line in 40 minutes. And you are asking me? A pause long enough to feel the weight of it. I'm asking you, Valshan said. I ended the call. I had 3 people I needed to reach before I could say yes. And I hated that those 3 people existed because every one of them was a door handle that might come off in my hand if I turned it wrong. Owen Calloway, Admiral Winters, and Deputy Secretary Alec Drummond, who was the kind of bureaucrat who needed the paperwork to exist before he could accept that the situation was real. I called all 3 simultaneously on a conference line. I had never done that before. I was not certain the system supported it. Apparently it did. I told them what I knew in under 2 minutes. Kelshari colony, 12,000 people. 6 hours, 2 frigates 40 minutes out. Alec Drummond started to speak about jurisdictional complications. I waited. He kept speaking. I waited more. Owen Calloway's voice came through. Quiet, Alec, 12,000 people. Silence. We are not conclave members, Drummond said. Any action we take in that corridor is outside every legal framework. Good, I said. Another silence, a different kind. Nora, I said, your frigates. Admiral Winters had been on the call without speaking until now. When she spoke, her voice had the particular quality it got when something had been decided 3 sentences ago, and the rest of the conversation was just waiting to catch up. They're already moving, she said. I authorized the course correction when you started the call. I sat back. You authorized it before we decided, Drummond said. I authorized it before we argued, she said. There's a difference. The conclave would call it unauthorized military action. They would be correct. We had no authority. We had no mandate. We had 2 frigates in a 40-minute window and 12,000 people on a colony that grew food on a rock and had called us because there was no one else to call. I spent the next 5 hours on the line with Winter's operations team. The frigates were commanded by Captain Owen Briggs on the lead vessel and Lieutenant Commander Diana Holt on the second. Briggs was 44, compact, quick in his thinking, with a voice that stayed low, no matter what the sensors were showing him. Holt was 37, newer to command, with the focused intensity of someone who had waited a long time for the opportunity to do something that mattered. The Dravan warships were larger, better armed by the standard metrics that the Conclave used to measure these things, metrics developed by species who had been fighting each other at long range with guided munitions for centuries and had built their entire strategic doctrine around the idea that close quarters was a failure state. They had never fought humans. Briggs closed the distance. That was it. That was the entire tactical decision. He took both frigates in at full acceleration directly toward the Dravan formation in a maneuver that the Dravan's probability models would have flagged as either a malfunction or a desperation charge, because no rational species approaches a superior force head-on when there are other options. Humans do not always use the other options. There is something in the deep architecture of the human species, worn into the bone over 10,000 years of being, smaller and slower and softer than most of what wanted to kill them, that understands the advantage of commitment, of removing the retreat from the calculation. The Dravan expected evasion. They had built their formation around containing evasion. Their overlapping fields of fire assumed a target that would try to stay at range. Briggs gave them a target that did not. The engagement lasted 22 minutes. I listened to the tactical feed with my eyes closed, following it through Winter's running commentary and the clipped exchanges between Briggs and Holt. There were moments that required everything I had to hold still and keep breathing. There was a period of approximately 4 minutes where the second frigate's communications went intermittent and I did not know where Diana Holt was. Then her voice came back, calm, a little breathless. "We're clear," she said. The Dravan warships withdrew. One was disabled. 2 retreated back through the corridor. The Kelshari colony's inner ring was unbroken. 12,000 people. I let out a breath that felt like it had been sitting in my chest for 6 hours. Briggs ordered his crew to stand down from combat alert. Then he told his damage control team to get the whole patches started. Then, and I learned this later from the mission report, he went to the supply locker where they kept the equipment flags, took out a Terran flag, and had one of his crew bolted to a piece of recovered debris floating at the edge of the engagement zone before they left. No message attached, no demand, no formal declaration of anything. Just the flag. The Conclave response fleet arrived 36 hours later. They found the wreckage. They found the colony intact. They found a Terran flag on a piece of debris with bolt marks that were exactly 43 hours old. Valshan sent me a message, private channel, again 5 words. "We will not forget this." I believed them. 3 days later, the Conclave sent me a formal notification, not a communication, a notification, the kind that expects no reply. It informed me that Earth had conducted unauthorized military operations within Conclave jurisdictional space and that the Conclave Security Council was convening to address the violation. I read it twice, then I filed it. When a reporter asked me about it at a Geneva press briefing, I said that Earth had responded to a distress call and that we would do so again under the same circumstances. The reporter asked if that meant we would keep acting outside Conclave authority. I looked at the camera. "We don't have Conclave authority," I said we never did, that was the vote. I left the podium before they could follow up. The conclave summons arrived 11 days after the engagement in the Kelshari corridor, not a request, not an invitation, a summons. The language was precise enough to leave no room for misreading. I flew to Conclave Station alone. Owen offered to send a legal team. I told him the only thing a legal team would accomplish was making us look like we believed we had done something wrong. We did not believe that. The chamber was different when I walked into it this time. Same walls, same atmospheric processors, same 42 steps from the entrance arch to the floor, but the quality of the attention in the room had changed. 40 species, and most of them were watching me the way people watch something they have not decided how to categorize yet. The Valka elder who spoke was not the same one from the resolution session. This elder was older, so old that its crystalline structure had compressed to near opacity, absorbing light rather than scattering it. It sat at the center dais like a piece of the station itself, like something that had been there since the station was built and intended to be there when the station was gone. It spoke for a long time. I listened to all of it. Earth had acted unilaterally. Earth had entered an active conflict zone without conclave authorization. Earth had deployed military assets in conclave jurisdictional space without membership status, without a mandate, without legal framework under which any of those actions could be permitted. The Conclave Security Council had reviewed the incident thoroughly. The Valka elder's voice carried the weight of someone who considered thoroughness a moral virtue. It told me the conclave could not allow a non-member species to project military capability within conclave space. The precedent was too dangerous, the disruption to the established order too significant. If Earth were permitted to act unilaterally, others would follow. The framework that maintains stability across 40 worlds and hundreds of inhabited systems would begin to fracture. The elder paused. I understood the pause as an invitation to respond with apology or explanation, the kind of response that would let the proceeding continue on its expected track. I reached into my jacket and took out a data slate. I want to read something, I said. The chamber was quiet. I read them the first petition, Earth's formal request for full conclave membership, submitted in 2198. The date, the reference number, the summary of the request, and the grounds on which it was denied. Then the second petition, 2203, denied. Then the third, 2207, denied. I went through all 14 of them slowly. Every date, every reference number, every denial stamp. I read the denial language out loud because the denial language was always the same, and repetition was doing the work I needed it to do. Non-binding, non-voting, non-essential. The chamber had started out quiet. By the seventh petition, it had become a different kind of quiet, the kind that happens when a room full of people realizes the floor is made of something other than what they thought. I put the slate down. You made us nothing, I said. You were very thorough about it. 14 times over 30 years you stamped us non-essential. You stripped our trade protections, our navigation access, our right to petition in emergencies. You built us out of your legal framework so completely that there is no framework left to violate. The elder's compressed surface absorbed the light, No scattered blue lines, just stillness. Nothing does not have jurisdiction, I said. Nothing cannot commit an unauthorized act. Nothing is just nothing. That was your decision. We simply took you at your word. No one in the chamber spoke. I did not fill the silence. I had learned in 11 years that filling silence is what you do when you are not certain. You are right, I was certain. Owen Calloway had told me before I left, quietly in the corridor outside the Geneva building, to not be surprised by what I found when I came back. He had said it in the careful way he said things that he already knew were important, but wanted me to discover in the right order. I found out what he meant before I even boarded the return shuttle. My secure line carried 14 new messages. Not from the Conclave, not from Earth's diplomatic corps. From 14 different species, some Conclave members, some in the outer systems, some in the disputed zones that existed in the gray space between Conclave authority and the deep dark of unclaimed territory. Each message was a formal communication, directed to the office of the Terran attaché, not the Conclave attaché, the Terran attaché. Each one requested a meeting. I sat in the shuttle's small communication bay and read them all. Kelshari, obviously, 3 of the smaller species along the Dravon border, who had watched the engagement and drawn their own conclusions. 2 deep space mining collectives whose operations sat in corridors the Conclave had never fully secured, the Twin Moon settlements of Groth, who had been trying to get Conclave protection for their shipping lanes for 6 years and had received what amounted to an extremely polite series of deferrals, all of them separately within the same 72-hour window, had sent their communications to Earth, not to ask for protection, not to beg, to propose. I called Owen from the shuttle. You knew, I said. I had an idea, he said. How long have you had this idea? A pause. Since about the 4th petition we filed, he said. I knew eventually the Conclave would push us far enough out that other pushed out species would start to notice we were still standing. Takes a while for a pattern to become visible. 14 species in 3 days. 14 so far, he said. I held the cracked stylus in my left hand and looked out the shuttle viewport at the distant spill of stars. We need a framework, I said. I have a draft, he said. I've had a draft for a while. Of course he had. The drafting sessions were the most exhausting 10 days of my life, and also in a way I could not fully explain and did not try to, the most necessary. We met in Geneva, then in Nairobi, then in a rented conference facility on the lunar outpost at Shackleton that had the advantage of being neutral in every terrestrial sense and private in every political one. The 14 species sent representatives. Some of them could not share in atmosphere and sent remote delegates. Instead, the Kelshari administrator Valshan was present in person, which I understood as a significant gesture. We called it the Terran Compact. The name was mine. I had written the first draft of the founding doctrine on the back of a transport manifest because I did not have better paper, and I had used the cracked stylus that was dry of ink and pressed hard enough to indent the words into the surface. The founding doctrine was 3 lines. Show up, stay, leave no flag unplanted. Simple enough to memorize in 30 seconds. Dense enough to spend a lifetime living. Up to the day after the compact was Formalized, the Vorkai made contact. Private channel, no record, one of their senior diplomatic staff, not the elder, but someone close to the elder, with the kind of access that meant the message carried full authority without the accountability of an official. Communication. The message asked what it would take for Earth to stand down. I prepared my response carefully. I gave myself 1 hour, then I sent it. The response was 40 seconds long. I had timed it deliberately. I did not list demands. I did not offer conditions. I described in plain and specific terms what was already in motion, the compact's membership as it stood, the resource agreement signed in the previous 10 days, the defensive pact with the Kelshari corridor species, which covered a stretch of space that happened to border 3 of the Conclave's most critical supply routes. The survey teams already moving into 2 stretches of unclaimed deep space, territory that the Conclave had never bothered to claim because it had never needed to. I described it the way you describe. Whether not a threat, a forecast, this is what is already true, this is what will continue to be true regardless of what you decide to do about it. Then I sent it and went to find something to eat because I had not eaten properly in 4 days, and there was a restaurant in the Shackleton outpost that made a credible version of jollof rice, and I had been thinking about it since the moment I landed. The Vorkai did not respond. That was fine. I had said everything that needed to be said. The TSS Unheard was commissioned on a Tuesday, which felt like the right kind of day for something important, not a Sunday ceremony with speeches and flags and carefully arranged media coverage. Tuesday, a working day, the kind of day when the people on a ship are already thinking about the next thing they have to do. I stood at the naming ceremony in the dry dock at Armstrong Station and watched the crew come aboard and thought about 12 words on a screen in 40 seconds at a podium, and how much ground separated those 2 moments from this. 1. The name had been Admiral Winter's suggestion. She had sent it to me in a message with no explanation, just the 2 words, and I had written back 2 words in return. Do it. The Unheard was the flagship of a fleet that 2 years ago had not existed as a fleet but only as a collection of vessels making quiet patrols through corridors the Conclave had written off. It was larger than the frigates, built differently, with a design philosophy that the engineering team had described as a response to everything, and they meant that literally. Not built for one kind of engagement, built for any engagement, for any environment, for the principle that the universe was large and unpredictable, and the only honest answer to that was a ship that could handle whatever it found. I was given a brief tour by the executive officer, a young man named Patrick Cole, who moved through the corridors at a pace that suggested he had a great deal to do and was very pleased about it. He was 28, from Edinburgh, with a particular combination of precision and restless energy that good executive officers have. He pointed out systems and specifications with the enthusiasm of someone who had helped design some of them. I nodded at the right intervals and tried to absorb the scale of the thing. It was large, not large by Vorkai standards, not large in the way the Conclave measured size, in the way ancient species measure things against their own centuries of accumulation, but large by the measurement of a species that had been told it was non-essential and had decided to build something that told a different story. After the tour, I stood at the viewport in the officer's observation bay and looked out at Armstrong Station spread across the view, supply bays operating at capacity, 3 more ships in secondary, construction dry docks, traffic moving in and out of the station with the rhythm of a system that was working, that had found its pace, that no longer needed to ask anyone for a lane assignment because it had spent the last 2 years negotiating its own. The Terran Compact had 22 member species. Now, not all of them were militarily significant, several of them were small, resource-limited, living on the margins of whatever the larger powers considered worth claiming. We had taken them all. Owen Calloway had argued briefly for being selective, for building something tight and strategically coherent. I had argued back for a different principle. You do not get to be the thing that tells other species they are non-essential. That argument ended the conversation. 22 species, 43 inhabited systems, represented trade routes that bypass the Conclave's primary corridors, entirely routing through the deep space stations that the Compact had been establishing quietly in the unclaimed zones. The Conclave had territories, the Compact had connections. The difference was not immediately obvious to anyone looking at a map, but was felt immediately by anyone trying to move goods or information across the mid-systems without paying Conclave transit fees. The Conclave had noticed, of course they had, you cannot build a parallel system at this scale without it eventually catching the attention of the system it parallels. There had been 3 formal diplomatic protests delivered to Geneva in the past 6 months. Owen had responded to each one with careful, lengthy, bureaucratically meticulous documents that engaged with every point raised and resolved nothing. I had approved all 3 responses. The goal was not resolution. The goal was to demonstrate that we understood the rules well enough to use them and to keep using them until the rules changed or the situation changed, whichever came first. Admiral Winters joined me at the viewport. She had a cup of tea. She did not offer to get me one, which was correct because she knew I did not drink tea, and she was not the kind of person who offered things for the sake of appearing considerate. Calla's application came through, she said. I looked at her. The Diplomatic Corps program, she said. She applied last month. I saw it in the intake list. Calla was 17 now. She had grown 3 cm since the last time I had seen her in person, and she had developed the habit of reading foreign policy documents on her own time, which I had not taught her, but had apparently not discouraged sufficiently. She was sharp and careful and asked hard questions and then held them until she got good answers, which was either diplomatic talent or a stubborn one, and in my experience the difference was mostly context. When she had told me she wanted to apply, I had held the cracked stylus in my hand and thought about the chamber and the 40 seconds and the young Volkite delegate in the corridor with its cloudy crystal structure and its genuinely curious question. I had thought about saying don't, not out of discouragement, out of the particular weight of having done this for a long time and knowing exactly what it cost. The chamber smell and the processed air, and the translated patience and the Small chime at the end of 40 seconds. That means you are done whether you are finished or not. I had thought about the Kelshari colony. 6 hours, 2 frigates, a flag bolted to debris. I had not said don't. She'll be good at it, I said to Winters. She'll be better than good, Winters said. She has your patience and her own anger, that's the combination. I thought about that. The patience was something I had built over time out of necessity, from the years in the chamber and the years of filing petitions that came back stamped with the same 12 words in different configurations. The anger was something I had managed for a long time, kept in its corner, taken out only when it was useful. Kala had not needed to build the patience yet. She was still young enough that the anger came first. That was fine. The patience would come, it always did, when the anger had nowhere to go but forward. I looked at the station beyond the viewport, at the ships moving through it, at the secondary dry docks where the new construction sat in its frames, half built and inevitable. The Volkai elder had asked in the summons hearing how the conclave was supposed to maintain stability if non-member species were permitted to act with autonomy. It was a real question, not rhetorical. The Volkai genuinely believed that the framework they had built was the thing holding everything together, and that anything which existed outside it was by definition destabilizing. I had understood the belief. I had not argued with it directly, because arguing with a belief on its own terms is how you spend forever and arrive nowhere. I had answered with the slate and the 14 petitions, which was an argument made out of evidence rather than logic, and evidence is harder to dismiss. But I had thought about the question since, in the months after the hearing, in the gap between sessions and briefings, in the quiet hours on transports between Geneva and Armstrong and back again. The conclave stability was real. It had held 40 worlds in relative peace for 2 centuries. That was not nothing. 2 centuries of relative peace across 40 species with competing interests and overlapping territories was a genuine accomplishment, and I had never pretended otherwise. But the stability had a cost that the 40 worlds at the center of it had never had to pay. The cost was paid by everyone in the margins, by the species that were non-essential, that were told their distress calls would be answered in 40 hours, that were told their petitions were non-binding, that were told the framework existed to protect them, while the framework's fine print quietly removed the protections 1 clause at a time. We had paid that cost for 30 years. Other species had paid it longer. The compact did not promise perfect stability. I had been honest about that. In every founding document and every public statement, what it promised was that when a distress call went out, something would move toward it, that when a corridor was threatened, something would hold it, that when a species needed to be heard, there was a table to sit at and a voice that would be present for more than 40 seconds. It was not a perfect system. It would make mistakes. It would face challenges that required solutions no one had thought of yet. It would grow in ways I could not predict and encounter problems that would require the people I was handing it to, people like Kala and Patrick Cole and the crew of the Unheard, to figure out answers that I had not written down anywhere. That was correct. That was how it was supposed to work. The thing you build is not supposed to fit only the shape of the hands that built it. Patrick Cole appeared at the observation bay door. Commander Oduya, we're ready. For departure prep if you'd like to be on the bridge for it. I looked at the viewport one more time. I thought about the Volkai delegate. Young, cloudy at the edges, standing the corridor outside the chamber with genuine curiosity in its voice. Does your kind even understand what just happened? Yes. We understood perfectly. We understood that being told you are nothing is not the end of the story. It is the moment before the story begins, when everything you were carrying quietly turns into everything you are going to build. We understood that the plea went unheard, not because it was weak, but because the people it was aimed at had decided before we spoke that we did not matter. That decision was theirs. What we did with it was ours. We understood that the stars do not belong to the species that has been watching them the longest. They belong to the ones willing to go there. I turned away from the viewport. I'll be on the bridge, I said. I put the cracked stylus in my left breast pocket, where it had lived for 11 years, where it would live until it finally fell apart, or until I handed it to someone who needed it more than I did. I walked forward. Behind me, the station lights fell away. Ahead, the dark opened up the way it always does, wide and unhurried and full of everything that has not happened yet. We were not the species that waited for permission. We were the species that came back every time, with more ships than we had before, and flags for every corridor we intended to keep.